Imagine opening your mailbox and finding a letter that says you could lose your home, all because your grass was a little too long. Sounds ridiculous, right? But that's exactly what happened to me. One day, I was just another homeowner, mowing my lawn and minding my own business. The next, I was facing threats of eviction from my own property, courtesy of the neighborhood HOA. You might think this is just another story about petty rules and power-hungry board members. But trust me, it gets better, because what the HOA didn't know was that I had a secret weapon, one that would turn their smug threats into a massive regret. If you've ever wondered what happens when an HOA picks a fight with the wrong person, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last laugh, you're going to want to hear how this all played out. I live in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood where most people wave as they walk their dogs and kids ride bikes up and down the street. My house isn't a mansion, but it's mine, a place I've worked hard for, paid every bill on time, and taken pride in keeping up. The lawn is usually trimmed, the flower beds are neat, and the mailbox never overflows. I'm not the type to let things slide. In fact, I've always tried to be a good neighbor, helping out when someone needed a hand, or keeping an eye on things when folks went on vacation. The community itself seemed peaceful, the kind of place where you'd expect everyone to mind their own business and respect each other's space. That's why the letter from the HOA hit so hard. It felt like a slap in the face, a punishment, for something so minor it barely registered. I wasn't some careless homeowner letting weeds take over. I was just a regular person, doing my best. The idea that I could lose my home over a patch of grass seemed not only unfair, but almost unbelievable. And yet, that's exactly where things started to unravel. Most mornings, I'd step outside with a cup of coffee, take in the fresh air, and check on the yard. I'd wave to Mrs. Carter as she walked her golden retriever, chat with Tom about the weather, and maybe pull a stray weed or two before heading inside. Weekends were for mowing the lawn, trimming the hedges, and making sure everything looked just right. It was a simple routine, but it gave me a sense of pride and belonging. The neighborhood felt safe, predictable, and friendly. Even the occasional HOA newsletter was just background noise, reminders about trash pickup or community events. I never imagined those small, everyday moments would be threatened. Looking back, there was a strange quiet that week, almost like the calm before a storm. I had no idea that a single letter was about to turn my peaceful routine upside down. The HOA board in our neighborhood had a reputation. People whispered about their obsession with rules. Mailboxes had to be a certain color. Holiday decorations couldn't stay up past January, and lawns had to be trimmed to a precise length. Most of us just rolled our eyes and complied, figuring it was easier than arguing. But then, one afternoon, I found a bright yellow envelope taped to my door. Inside was a formal warning. My grass was noticeably overgrown and in violation of community standards. I stared at the letter, confused. My lawn looked like everyone else's. Maybe I'd missed a spot, but eviction. That seemed impossible. The next week, another letter arrived, this time with a fine attached. The language was harsher, threatening further action if I didn't comply. I tried calling the HOA, but got nothing but voicemail. Then came the third letter, and this one was different. It stated, in bold print, that if I didn't address the issue immediately, the board would begin the process to evict me from my own home. I couldn't believe it. Over grass, the board's nitpicking had turned into a full-blown threat, and I realized this was no ordinary warning. After that third letter, things only got worse. The HOA started sending notices almost every other day. Each one was more aggressive than the last. The fines kept piling up, $50, then $100, then $200. It felt like they were trying to bury me in paperwork and penalties. I'd walk outside and see board members slowly driving by, staring at my yard like they were hunting for evidence. One afternoon, I overheard two of them talking at the end of my driveway. If we let him slide, everyone else will think they can ignore the rules, one said. The other just shook her head and scribbled something on a clipboard. At the next HOA meeting, my name was brought up in front of everyone. We have a homeowner who refuses to maintain their property, the president announced, looking right at me. Neighbors glanced over, some with sympathy, others with judgment. I tried to defend myself, explaining that my grass was barely over the limit and that I'd always kept my yard neat. The board didn't care. Rules are rules, they said. If you can't follow them, maybe this isn't the right community for you. The pressure was constant. I started dreading the mail, expecting another threat or fine every time I opened the box. Friends in the neighborhood stopped by less often, not wanting to get caught in the middle. I felt isolated, singled out, and powerless. The injustice of it all made my blood boil. I wasn't some careless neighbor letting my property fall apart. I was being targeted, and the board seemed determined to make an example out of me. Every day the tension grew, and I knew I couldn't let this go on much longer. From the HOA's perspective, they were just doing their job. We have to maintain standards, the president insisted at every meeting. They claimed that if they let one lawn slide, the whole neighborhood would go downhill. To them, it was about protecting property values and keeping everything uniform. They pointed to the bylaws, arguing that rules were rules, no matter how small the infraction. The board saw themselves as guardians of the community, convinced that strict enforcement was the only way to keep things nice. But from where I stood, it felt completely different. This was my home, not just a line in a rulebook. My grass was barely over the limit, maybe an inch at most. I'd always taken care of my property, and now I was being threatened with eviction over something so minor. It felt absurd. The emotional toll was real. I felt anxious every time I saw a board member or got another letter. The practical stakes were even higher. Losing my home over a patch of grass, it was unthinkable. The HOA saw a rule to enforce. I saw my life being turned upside down for no good reason. The gap between us was growing wider by the day. The final straw came when I opened a letter marked urgent. Inside was a formal notice. The HOA had officially started the eviction process. My heart pounded as I read the words. I felt a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. That night, I barely slept, replaying every interaction and wondering how things had gotten so out of hand. But as the sun came up, something in me snapped. I realized I couldn't let them bully me out of my own home. That's when I remembered my cousin, a top-tier lawyer who specialized in property law. I picked up the phone and called him, explaining everything. He listened, then said, "They picked the wrong person to mess with." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. I wasn't alone anymore, and I was ready to fight back with everything I had. I knew I couldn't fight this alone, so I called my cousin, who just happened to be a real estate attorney with a reputation for dismantling overzealous HOA letters. The moment I explained the situation, he laughed and said, "Let's have some fun." We started by gathering every letter, fine, and notice the HOA had sent. My cousin combed through the HOA bylaws line by line, looking for anything the board might have missed. It didn't take long to spot their first mistake. The bylaws required a formal inspection and a writ 10 warning before any fines could be issued. The board had skipped the inspection entirely and jumped straight to threats. Strike one. Next, we noticed the fines themselves were way above what the bylaws allowed. The maximum penalty for a first offense was supposed to be $25, not the hundreds they tried to charge me. Strike two. My cousin drafted a letter to the HOA, citing every violation of their own rules, and demanded that all fines be dropped immediately. He also requested copies of all board meeting minutes related to my case, which they were legally required to provide. When the minutes arrived, we found even more ammunition. The board had discussed my situation in private, without notifying me or giving me a chance to defend myself. Another clear violation. With all this evidence, my cousin prepared a countersuit for harassment and breach of contract. The letter we sent was polite but firm, outlining every misstep and making it clear we were ready to take this to court. Suddenly, the tone from the HOA changed. The board president called, trying to work things out and suggesting we could find a compromise. I could hear the nervousness in his voice. For the first time in weeks, I felt the pressure lift. The board realized they'd picked the wrong person to bully. My confidence grew with every call and email. I wasn't just defending my lawn, I was standing up for myself. And I knew I had the upper hand. The shift was immediate. The next HOA meeting was tense, with board members whispering and avoiding eye contact. The president, who once spoke so confidently about maintaining standards, now stumbled over his words. My cousin attended with me, briefcase in hand, and calmly laid out every violation the board had committed. He explained the legal consequences of their actions, making it clear that if they didn't drop the fines and threats, we'd see them in court. The room went silent. One board member nervously asked if we could just move past this. Another apologized for the misunderstanding. Within days, I received a formal letter from the HOA, stating that all fines were rescinded and no further action would be taken. They even offered to review their enforcement procedures to prevent this from happening again. The sense of relief was overwhelming. I'd stood my ground and won. The board's power play had backfired, and my rights as a homeowner were finally respected. For the first time in weeks, I could step outside, look at my lawn, and know I'd beaten them at their own game. Life in the neighborhood changed after that. The HOA became much more cautious, double-checking every notice before sending it out. They stopped nitpicking over tiny issues and actually listened when homeowners spoke up. My peace was restored, and I could finally enjoy my home without worrying about another letter or fine. Looking back, I realized how important it is to stand up for yourself, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Sometimes, all it takes is knowing your rights and refusing to be intimidated. I learned that bullies back down when you push back with facts and confidence. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, don't be afraid to fight for what's fair. Would you have done the same? Or would you have handled it differently? I'd love to hear how you deal with an overreaching HOA or a neighbor who goes too far. Have you ever dealt with an overzealous HOA or been hit with unfair rules in your own neighborhood? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you fight back or try to keep the peace? I know a lot of people have their own stories about power-hungry boards or ridiculous fines, and I'd love to hear yours. Drop your experiences or advice in the comments below. Let's see who's had the wildest run-in with an HOA. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this story.